When my son Brandon called me in tears begging me to babysit, I said yes without hesitation, like I always do. At 72, with arthritis flaring, I didn't expect luxury, but I never imagined he'd banish me to that ancient couch with springs digging into my back all weekend. The guest room, being renovated, he claimed, but I saw it filled with expensive new exercise equipment while I suffered in pain. After 2 sleepless nights caring for his kids, he didn't even offer to drive me home. 3 days later, he called not to check if I was okay, but demanding his monthly support check. The same money that paid for his college, his wedding, and now apparently his fancy weekend getaways while I slept on a lumpy couch. That's when I cut the financial cord. His reaction showed me exactly who he'd become: entitled, selfish, and completely blind to all I'd sacrificed. For 20 years, I worked double shifts to give him everything after his father died. Now he treated me like a walking ATM who didn't deserve basic comfort in his home. I wasn't surprised when Brandon called asking for another favor. My son had a talent for timing these requests when I was most vulnerable, like today when arthritis had me moving slower than usual. "Mom, we desperately need a mental health break," he explained, his voice carrying that familiar urgency. "Just 2 nights with the kids, please." At 72, I should have learned to say no to my only child, but old habits die hard. 20 years of raising him alone after James died had programmed an automatic yes into my vocabulary where Brandon was concerned. "The kids miss you," he added, knowing exactly which heartstrings to pull. I sighed, already reaching for my calendar. "When?" "This weekend, Friday evening through Sunday." The relief in his voice was palpable, as if he'd never doubted I would agree. "I'll be there by 6, I promised, mentally rescheduling my book club and canceling my standing Saturday morning coffee date with Helen. When I arrived at Brandon's sprawling suburban home Friday evening, laden with homemade cookies and new books for Emma and Tyler, my grandchildren greeted me with enthusiastic hugs. At 7 and 9, they were bundles of energy that made my heart swell even as my body protested. Brandon barely looked up from his phone as he rushed through instructions about bedtimes and allergies I already knew by heart. "The guest room is being renovated," he explained as an afterthought, gesturing toward the ancient couch in his living room. "Sorry about that." I nodded, hiding my disappointment while my grandchildren bounced around me with excitement. The sofa in question was a hand-me-down from my sister Helen years ago, lumpy, saggy, and barely suitable for sitting, let alone sleeping. "Jade's parents sent us to this amazing resort for our anniversary, but we couldn't use it until now," Brandon continued, finally pocketing his phone. "You're really saving us, Mom." Jade, my daughter-in-law, hurried downstairs with weekend bags, her blonde hair freshly styled, diamond earrings catching the light. "Martha, you're a lifesaver," she said, air-kissing near my cheek. "We've been desperate for this break." I smiled tightly, nodding her new designer handbag, the one she'd mentioned coveting last month when they'd asked for extra help with their property taxes. Later, while retrieving extra pillows from the hallway closet, I passed the supposedly under-renovation guest room door slightly ajar, revealing expensive new exercise equipment still bearing price tags. A treadmill, an elliptical machine, and what appeared to be a full-weight set occupied the space where the guest bed had once stood. My back already ached at the prospect of 2 nights on that couch, but I said nothing as I returned to the living room where Brandon was giving the children last-minute instructions to be good for Grandma. That night, as I tried to find a position that wouldn't aggravate my back on the lumpy couch, I overheard Brandon on the phone in the kitchen. "Yeah, Mom always comes through," he laughed to whoever was on the line. "We're going to have an amazing weekend at Pinehurst. Jade's been dying to try that new spa treatment." I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling every one of my 72 years and so very, very tired. Morning came after a fitful night's sleep. Emma and Tyler were early risers, and by 6:30 they were asking for breakfast and cartoons. I pushed myself up from the couch, my back screaming in protest, but managed a smile for their eager faces. "Pancakes?" I suggested, and was rewarded with cheers. The day passed in a blur of activities. The park, lunch at their favorite burger place, an afternoon movie at home when rain started. I kept up as best I could, taking discreet breaks to stretch my aching back when the children were occupied. That evening, after tucking them into bed with stories and kisses, I discovered there were no clean towels for me to shower. Opening the linen closet revealed plenty of fresh towels, monogrammed and plush, but clearly designated as guest towels by a neatly printed label in Jade's handwriting. Rather than disturb these apparently sacred items, I used a hand towel from the children's bathroom and returned to my couch, where I took 2 pain relievers for my throbbing back. Sunday morning brought no relief. My back felt worse, spasms shooting down my left leg whenever I moved too quickly. Still, I made breakfast, helped Emma with her reading homework, and refereed an argument between the siblings over whose turn it was with the tablet. By afternoon, I was functioning on sheer willpower and more pain relievers than I should have taken. The mental health break had extended several hours beyond their promised return time, leaving me to manage dinner for 2 energetic children despite barely being able to stand upright. When Brandon and Jade finally breezed through the door, tanned and relaxed, neither noticed my discomfort. "The kids behave for you?" Brandon asked, scrolling through his phone rather than making eye contact. "They were wonderful," I replied, gathering my overnight bag. "I should get home." "Thanks, Martha," Jade said, already heading upstairs. "You're a lifesaver." Neither offered to help me to my car or asked if I needed anything. Neither suggested I stay the night in my own bed rather than drive home in pain. It wasn't malice, it was something worse. Invisibility. The drive home was excruciating. Each bump in the road sent shockwaves through my spine. When I finally reached my modest but comfortable house, the one I'd maintained alone since James died when Brandon was 16, I could barely make it inside. I spent Monday in bed, alternating heat and ice on my back. By Tuesday, I managed to see my doctor, who prescribed muscle relaxants and physical therapy. "You're not as young as you used to be, Martha," he reminded me unnecessarily. "You need to be careful." 3 days later, while at my first physical therapy appointment, my phone rang. I recognized Brandon's number and answered, wondering if perhaps he was calling to check on me. "Mom, just checking on that monthly support deposit," Brandon said, skipping any greeting. "Our mortgage payment is due, and I'm a little short this month." I'd been sending Brandon and his family $2,000 monthly since his business temporarily struggled 3 years ago. The temporary assistance had somehow become an expected part of their budget. "Actually, Brandon," I said, surprising myself with my steady voice, "there won't be a deposit this month." The silence on the other end was deafening. "What, why not?" he finally sputtered. "The couch made it clear where I stand in your life," I explained. "I'm not an afterthought deserving of discomfort after raising you alone for 20 years. I could almost hear his brain recalibrating, searching for the right approach to change my mind. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. We don't have a guest room anymore, it's being renovated." I saw the exercise equipment, Brandon. "The guest bed is gone because you replaced it, not because of renovations." "That's not fair," he began, but I continued. "What's not fair is expecting me to sleep on a broken-down couch at my age, then calling only when you need money." What followed was an eruption of entitlement so raw it made me flinch. My son, the boy I'd worked double shifts to put through college, accused me of abandonment, of being selfish, of not caring about my grandchildren. I hung up when the tears started, but not before saying, "When you're ready to talk with respect, my door is open." By Sunday evening, my back was in agony. The mental health break had extended several hours beyond their promised return time, leaving me to manage dinner for 2 energetic children despite barely being able to stand upright. When Brandon and Jade finally breezed through the door, tanned and relaxed, neither noticed my discomfort. "The kids behave for you?" Brandon asked, scrolling through his phone rather than making eye contact. "They were wonderful," I replied, gathering my overnight bag. "I should get home." "Thanks, Martha," Jade said, already heading upstairs. "You're a lifesaver." Neither offered to help me to my car or asked if I needed anything. Neither suggested I stay the night in my own bed rather than drive home in pain. It wasn't malice, it was something worse. Invisibility. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was at a physical therapy appointment for my back. Mom, just checking on that monthly support deposit, Brandon said, skipping any greeting. Our mortgage payment is due, and I'm a little short this month. I'd been sending Brandon and his family $2,000 monthly since his business temporarily struggled 3 years ago. The temporary assistance had somehow become an expected part of their budget. Actually, Brandon, I said, surprising myself with my steady voice, there won't be a deposit this month. The silence on the other end was deafening. What? Why not? He finally sputtered. The couch made it clear where I stand in your life, I explained. I'm not an afterthought deserving of discomfort after raising you alone for 20 years. What followed was an eruption of entitlement so raw it made me flinch. My son, the boy I'd worked double shifts to put through college, accused me of abandonment, of being selfish, of not caring about my grandchildren. I hung up when the tears started, but not before saying, when you're ready to talk with respect, my door is open. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, second-guessing my decision. Had I overreacted? Was using money as leverage just another form of manipulation? The physical therapist noticed my distraction. Everything okay, Martha? She asked as she helped me through a gentle stretching routine. Family complications, I murmured, not wanting to admit what I'd just done. That evening my phone lit up with notifications. Brandon had sent 6 texts, each more accusatory than the last. How could you do this to us? We depend on that money. What am I supposed to tell Jade? The kids will suffer because of your pettiness. You're punishing your grandchildren over a couch? I thought you loved us. I turned off my phone, unable to bear more. The guilt was overwhelming, but beneath it lay something else, a certainty that this pattern needed to break. If not now, when? The next morning, Jade called. Martha, I don't know what's going on between you and Brandon, but you have to understand our position, she began without preamble. We have commitments, financial obligations. The club membership, the children's private school tuition, our mortgage. We can't just absorb a $2,000 loss overnight. I listened silently, nodding. She hadn't once asked about my well-being or acknowledged what had happened over the weekend. Brandon says you're upset about sleeping arrangements. If we'd known it was such a big deal, we would have given you our room, she continued, though we all knew that wasn't true. It's not about the couch, Jade, I finally said. It's about respect, about being treated like a person, not a resource. This isn't like you, Martha, she said, her voice hardening. You've always been so generous, so understanding. Perhaps too understanding, I replied before ending the call. Later that day, my sister Helen phoned. Brandon had obviously recruited her to his cause. Martha, don't you think you're being a bit harsh? She began. Brandon says you've cut him off completely because of some misunderstanding about sleeping arrangements. I explained what had happened, including the lie about renovations and the glimpse of expensive exercise equipment. Still, Helen persisted, they're family. You can't just pull the rug out financially without warning. I've been supporting them for 3 years, Helen. It was supposed to be temporary until his business recovered. The economy's been tough and they have the children to consider, she argued. The economy hasn't been too tough for new exercise equipment or weekend spa getaways, I countered. Helen sighed. I just hate to see the family divided. What if Brandon keeps the grandchildren from you? Is that worth it? Her words hit their mark. The thought of not seeing Emma and Tyler twisted like a knife. But I remembered something my late husband James used to say. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them drown you. The worst call came that evening. Emma's little voice broke my heart. Grandma, Daddy says we can't see you anymore because you don't want to help our family, she sobbed into the phone. Don't you love us anymore? I clutched the phone tighter. Of course I love you, sweetheart, more than anything. This is grown-up stuff between your daddy and me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you and Tyler. But Daddy says we can't come to your house until you start helping again, she hiccuped. Using the children as emotional leverage was a new low, even for Brandon. After reassuring Emma of my love, I ended the call and sat in my kitchen, questioning everything. Was I being petty? Using money as a weapon? The pain in my back had subsided, but the ache in my heart intensified. Then the mail arrived, a credit card offer addressed to Brandon at my address. Strange. I never received his mail. I opened it, something I'd never normally do, and discovered he'd been using my address for financial applications. This explained the increase in credit offers I'd been receiving. Looking deeper, I found he'd listed my home as his primary residence on the application. Was he that financially desperate, or had this been going on for some time? That night, I remembered something my late husband used to say: loving someone doesn't mean letting them drown you. James had always been wiser than me about boundaries. I wrote Brandon a letter detailing exactly why I'd made my decision. It wasn't about a couch. It was about years of taking advantage, of entitlement, of forgetting that relationships require mutual respect. I explained that my support had become enabling, and that I loved him too much to continue. I never mailed it. Sometimes, the most important conversations happen in silence, with ourselves. A week passed with no contact from Brandon. I filled my days with activities I'd long neglected: lunch with old friends, volunteering at the community garden, attending a water aerobics class that helped my back. I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been subsumed by my role as Brandon's support system. The physical therapist noticed the change at my next appointment. "You're moving much better this week," she observed. "And there's something else different too. You seem, I don't know, lighter somehow." I smiled. "I think I've set down a burden I've been carrying too long." That afternoon, I received a formal-looking envelope from Brandon's address. My heart sank, expecting legal threats or more emotional manipulation. Instead, I found a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences. "I need to talk to you, not about money. Can I come over tomorrow morning?" I texted a simple response: 10 a.m. That night, I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say, how I would stand firm yet keep the door open for reconciliation. By morning, I was exhausted but resolved. Whatever happened, I wouldn't go back to the old pattern. At precisely 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. The next week brought a barrage of manipulative attempts to make me reconsider. Jade called to explain their financial commitments. My sister Helen phoned to tell me I was being unreasonable. The worst came when Emma called, her little voice tearful. "Daddy says we can't see you anymore because you don't want to help our family," she sobbed. I sat in my kitchen afterward, questioning everything. Was I being petty, using money as a weapon? The pain in my back had subsided, but the ache in my heart intensified. Then the mail arrived, a credit card offer addressed to Brandon at my address. Strange. I opened it, something I'd never normally do, and discovered he'd been using my address for financial applications. This explained the increase in credit offers I'd been receiving. That night, I remembered something my late husband used to say: loving someone doesn't mean letting them drown you. James had always been wiser than me about boundaries. I wrote Brandon a letter detailing exactly why I'd made my decision. It wasn't about a couch. It was about years of taking advantage, of entitlement, of forgetting that relationships require mutual respect. I explained that my support had become enabling and that I loved him too much to continue. I never mailed it. Sometimes the most important conversations happen in silence, with ourselves. The doorbell rang on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after I'd cut off the financial support. I peered through the peephole, shocked to see Brandon standing there, not with anger on his face, but something I hadn't seen in years: humility. "Mom," he said when I opened the door, looking down at his feet. "Can I come in?" He carried a toolbox and had his truck parked in my driveway, loaded with lumber and supplies. "What's all this?" I asked, stepping aside to let him enter. "I'm going to convert your spare room into a proper guest suite," he said quietly. "And I've applied for 3 jobs this week." I stood frozen, searching for the trap, the manipulation angle I'd come to expect. "Why?" I finally managed. "Because you were right," he admitted, meeting my eyes for the first time. I haven't been the son you deserve." I gestured toward the kitchen, not trusting my voice. We sat at the small table where I'd helped him with homework decades ago, where he'd announced his engagement, where we'd planned James's funeral. So many life milestones around this worn oak surface. Coffee. I offered, needing something to do with my hands. Brandon nodded, and I busied myself with the familiar ritual. When I placed a steaming mug before him, he wrapped his hands around it like it was a lifeline. I lost my job 6 months ago, he confessed suddenly. The company downsized and my position was eliminated. I stared at him. 6 months, but you never said anything. I was ashamed, he said, his voice barely audible. Executive positions don't just fall from trees at my age. I kept thinking I'd find something comparable, but nothing materialized. Over coffee, truths emerged that had long been buried. The business struggles had evolved into living beyond their means, financing a lifestyle they couldn't afford to keep up with the neighbors. I've been pretending everything was fine, he confessed. Using your money to maintain appearances while looking for another executive position that just hasn't materialized. I thought of the expensive exercise equipment, the luxury resort weekend. Why not just tell me the truth? I would have understood. Because, he said, his voice breaking, I was supposed to be successful enough to help you at this stage of your life, not the other way around. The raw honesty in his voice stripped away years of frustration. I saw not the entitled man who'd relegated me to a lumpy couch, but the small boy who'd once tried to hide a failed math test because he didn't want to disappoint me. Pride is expensive, I said softly. Brandon nodded, eyes wet. I've been paying interest on mine for too long. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken fears and expectations between us. The guest room project, I finally said, gesturing toward his truck. Is that what this is about? Trying to earn the monthly support back, he shook his head. I'm not asking for the money, Mom. I'm trying to make amends. I realized when you cut me off that I'd been taking you for granted for years, using your generosity as a crutch instead of solving my own problems. I studied his face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown accustomed to. Instead, I saw only exhaustion and genuine remorse. I've been applying for jobs every day, he continued. Not just executive positions. Anything I'm qualified for. I've had 3 interviews this week. And Jade? I asked, thinking of my daughter-in-law's expensive tastes. Brandon grimaced. That's been harder. She doesn't understand why we have to cut back when her friends are all upgrading to newer cars and bigger houses. Marriage isn't easy, I said, remembering my own struggles with James during lean times. No, it's not, he agreed. But that's on me to manage, not you. He stood, gesturing toward his truck. May I get started on the room? It's the least I can do after what happened. I nodded, still processing this unexpected turn. As he headed out to collect supplies, I called after him, Brandon, where did you get the money for all this if you're not working? He paused, looking embarrassed. I sold the exercise equipment and my golf clubs, got about half what I paid, but it was enough for this. The sacrifice in that simple statement told me more than his words ever could. Over the next few days, Brandon arrived each morning to work on transforming my spare room. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we worked in companionable silence. The physical labor seemed to be therapeutic for him, a tangible way to make amends. I remember when you used to do my science projects with me, he said one afternoon as we painted the walls. You'd work all day, then stay up half the night helping me build a volcano or solar system. You remember that? I asked, surprised. I remember everything, Mom, including how I never had to worry about money even though we didn't have much. That was your doing, wasn't it? I nodded, throat tight with emotion. You never took a vacation, he continued, applying paint with careful strokes. Never bought yourself nice things. It was always about making sure I had what I needed. That's what parents do, I said simply. Not all parents, he corrected. I haven't been doing that. I've been putting my wants, our wants, before the kids' needs. As the week progressed, I saw subtle changes in Brandon. He spoke more openly about his job search, his fears, his hopes. The entitled attitude that had characterized our recent interactions was fading, replaced by a humility I hadn't seen since he was young. On Friday afternoon, as we installed new curtain rods in the nearly completed room, his phone rang. He checked the screen, eyes widening. It's about the operations manager position I interviewed for on Tuesday, he whispered, then answered. I busied myself with hanging curtains, giving him privacy while trying not to eavesdrop. When he ended the call, his face was flushed with excitement. I got it, he said, voice trembling slightly. It's not what I was making before, but it's a solid mid-level position with benefits. I start Monday. I hugged him tightly, genuinely proud. You did this on your own merit, I reminded him. Not through connections or shortcuts. As we celebrated with iced tea on the porch, Brandon brought up the subject we'd been avoiding. Mom, about the support money, he began cautiously. My heart sank a little. Had this all been an elaborate play to restore the monthly checks? I waited, keeping my expression neutral. I was thinking about what you said about enabling versus supporting, he continued. You were right to cut me off. It forced me to face reality in a way nothing else could have. I blinked, surprised by the direction this was taking. But he hesitated. Would you consider helping us temporarily? Just until we get back on our feet. I promise it won't be like before. It was the question I'd been dreading, the test of whether anything had really changed. Yes, I said carefully. With conditions, monthly budget reviews, financial counseling for both you and Jade, and a clear timeline for independence. Instead of arguing, Brandon nodded. That's fair, more than fair. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly supporting my son rather than enabling him. The physical transformation of my spare room mirrored something deeper happening between us. Brandon arrived each morning, often before his job interviews, to work on the project. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we worked in companionable silence. I remember when you used to do my science projects with me, he said one afternoon as we painted the walls. You'd work all day, then stay up half the night helping me build a volcano or solar system. You remember that? I asked, surprised. I remember everything, Mom, including how I never had to worry about money even though we didn't have much. That was your doing, wasn't it? I nodded, throat tight with emotion. You never complained, he continued, applying paint with careful strokes. Never made me feel like a burden, even though you must have been exhausted most of the time. That's what parents do, I said simply. Not all parents, he corrected. I haven't been doing that. I've been putting my wants, our wants, before the kids' needs. I thought about how he and Jade had prioritized the exercise equipment over a comfortable place for me to sleep, their weekend getaway over my well-being. It wasn't malicious, just thoughtless, self-centered in a way that had become their default. When did you start using my address for credit applications? I asked, the question emerging before I could reconsider. Brandon's brush paused mid-stroke. His shoulders slumped. You know about that? I got an offer in the mail, addressed to you. He set down his brush, wiped his hands on a rag. About 4 months ago, my credit score tanked after we missed some payments. I couldn't qualify for anything. Were you planning to tell me? He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. I was going to handle it before you ever found out. Pay off the cards, fix my credit. Just another shortcut that seemed harmless at the time. The admission hung between us, another layer of deception I hadn't known about. Yet instead of anger, I felt a strange relief. At least now we were dealing with the full truth. By the room's completion, Brandon had secured a position, not at the executive level he'd once held, but a solid mid-level job with benefits. The pay would require lifestyle adjustments for his family. I've created a budget, he told me, showing me a spreadsheet on his laptop. We're selling the house, it's too expensive anyway. The kids can share a room in the smaller place we're looking at. I studied his face, searching for resentment but finding only resolve. Would you? He hesitated. Would you consider helping us temporarily? Just until we get back on our feet? I promise it won't be like before. It was the question I'd been dreading, the test of whether anything had really changed. Yes, I said carefully. With conditions, monthly budget reviews, financial counseling for both you and Jade, and a clear timeline for independence. Instead of arguing, Brandon nodded. That's fair, more than fair. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly supporting my son rather than enabling him. The next challenge came when Brandon invited me to dinner at his home the following weekend. I hesitated, remembering the lumpy couch, the casual disregard. Jade wants to apologize too, he explained. And the kids miss you terribly. I agreed, though anxiety fluttered in my chest as I drove to their house Saturday evening. Would old patterns reassert themselves once I stepped through that door? Jade met me with a stiff smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Martha, thank you for coming, she said formally, taking my coat. The house looked different somehow, less cluttered, with several of the more ostentatious decorative items missing. I noticed empty spaces on walls where expensive artwork had hung. We've been selling things we don't need, Brandon explained, noticing my gaze. Amazing how much stuff we accumulated that wasn't adding any real value to our lives. Emma and Tyler launched themselves at me, chattering excitedly about school and friends and a million other things I'd missed in our weeks apart. Their enthusiasm was genuine, untainted by the adult complications swirling around them. Dinner was simple, a homemade lasagna rather than the expensive takeout that had been their habit. As we ate, Jade remained quiet, contributing little to the conversation. So, she finally said as we finished dessert, Brandon tells me you're helping us with a budget now. The edge in her voice was unmistakable. Jade, Brandon warned quietly. No, I think we should talk about it, she insisted. I agreed to downsize the house to cut back on expenses. But I don't think I should have to account for every penny I spend, like some child asking for an allowance. There it was, the resentment I'd been expecting, just from an unexpected source. You're right, I said calmly. Adults shouldn't have to account for every penny to other adults. Jade blinked, clearly surprised by my agreement. But I continued, adults do need to account for their spending to themselves. That's what a budget is, a plan for your own money, not permission from someone else. Mom helped me create the budget, Jade. She didn't dictate it, Brandon added. And it's the only way we're going to dig ourselves out of this hole. A hole you created, Jade snapped. I wasn't the one who lost my job and hid it for months. The children looked up, sensing the tension. Tyler's lower lip trembled. Hey guys, why don't you go play in your room for a bit? Brandon suggested gently. Grown-up talk time. Once they were gone, I took a deep breath. This isn't about blame. It's about moving forward together. Easy for you to say, Jade muttered. You're not the one who has to explain to friends why you're suddenly living in a townhouse instead of a proper home, or why your kids can't do the same activities as their classmates anymore. Is that what this is about? Brandon asked, incredulous. What other people think? Don't act so superior, Jade shot back. You were just as concerned with appearances until your mother cut us off. I watched them, realizing that my financial intervention had exposed fractures in their relationship that money had been papering over for years. Perhaps I should go, I suggested, uncomfortable witnessing what felt like a private marital moment. No, they both said simultaneously. Mom, please stay, Brandon added. We need to work through this, all of us together. What followed was one of the most honest conversations I'd ever witnessed between them. Jade admitted feeling humiliated by their financial situation, terrified of losing social standing. Brandon confessed his shame at failing as the family provider, how it had driven him to increasingly desperate measures. I kept thinking the next job would solve everything, he explained. That we just needed to maintain appearances a little longer until I could replace my income. And I kept spending like nothing had changed because facing reality meant admitting failure, Jade added softly. I sat quietly, letting them find their way through this necessary reckoning. This wasn't my battle to fight, it was theirs to resolve together. Eventually, Jade turned to me. I'm sorry about the couch, she said, sincerity finally breaking through her defensive shell. It was thoughtless and disrespectful. Thank you, I acknowledged simply. We've put the old sofa out for donation, Brandon added. Bought a pull-out bed for the living room instead. Not that you'll need it, the guest room will always be ready for you in the new place. By the time I left that evening, something had shifted, not just between Brandon and me, but within their family unit. The pretense was cracking, making way for something more authentic. It wouldn't be easy, real change never is, but they were finally facing the same direction. As I drove home, I thought about James and what he would make of all this. You finally did it, old girl, I could almost hear him say. You finally learned to love without enabling. For the first time since cutting off the financial support, I felt completely at peace with my decision. Sometimes the hardest form of love is the one that lets people face consequences. It had taken me 72 years to learn that lesson, but seeing the beginnings of real change in my son made it worth the wait. 3 months later, I hosted a family dinner at my home, the first since our confrontation. Brandon and Jade had downsized to a modest townhouse near the children's school, and contrary to Jade's fears, Emma and Tyler seemed to be adjusting well to the change. "Grandma, we have bunk beds now," Emma informed me excitedly as they arrived. "I get the top because I'm older." "That's not fair," Tyler protested, though without real heat. At 7, he still idolized his sister despite their squabbles. "Life rarely is," I replied, winking at him. "But I happen to know the bottom bunk is safer in case of zombie attacks." Tyler's eyes widened. "Really?" "Absolutely," I said solemnly. "Zombies always check the top bunk first." The children ran off to play in the backyard while I finished preparing dinner. Brandon helped set the table, a small gesture that wouldn't have happened months ago. "How's the new job going?" I asked as we arranged silverware. "Better than expected," he admitted. "The team is solid and the work is challenging in a good way. Less status than before, but honestly I sleep better at night." Jade moved around my kitchen with surprising competence, tossing a salad and refilling water glasses. The designer clothes and perfectly manicured nails were gone, replaced by jeans and a simple blouse. She looked younger somehow, more relaxed. "I got a part-time job," she announced casually. 3 days a week at the children's school library. The hours work perfectly with pickup and drop-off. I raised my eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Jade had never worked during their marriage, often citing the importance of being available for the children. "It's not much money," she continued, "but it helps and I actually enjoy it. Who knew I'd like being surrounded by books and small people?" My sister Helen arrived last, bearing a homemade pie and barely concealed curiosity. She'd heard about the changes in Brandon's family but hadn't seen them firsthand. Dinner progressed pleasantly until dessert, when Jade muttered something about all the family drama over a couch. The table fell silent. My sister Helen looked down at her plate. Brandon set his fork down deliberately. "It wasn't about the couch, Jade," he said firmly. "It was about respect, about recognizing what my mother deserves after everything she's done for us." "I just think," Jade began. "No," Brandon interrupted. "Mom was right to cut us off. We needed the wake-up call." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to me. Inside was my most recent support check, uncashed. "We won't be needing this anymore," he announced. "The new budget is working, we're making it on our own." I stared at the check, emotions washing over me in waves, pride in his accomplishment, relief at the burden lifted, sadness for the years wasted in unhealthy patterns. "Brandon," I started. "I know what you're going to say," he interjected. "That we should keep it as a safety net. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that got us into trouble in the first place. We need to stand on our own feet." "Actually," I said, smiling, "I was going to suggest putting it into education funds for Emma and Tyler." Brandon blinked, then laughed. "Always thinking ahead, aren't you, Mom?" "Someone in this family has to," I replied, but there was no bite to my words. The rest of the evening passed in a warmth I hadn't felt in our family gatherings for years. Even Helen commented on it as she helped me clean up after everyone left. "I have to admit, I thought you were making a mistake," she said, drying dishes beside me. "Cutting him off seemed so harsh at the time." "It was," I acknowledged. "But sometimes harshness is necessary for growth." "Well, whatever you did worked. I haven't seen Brandon this grounded since before his father died." I considered her words as I put away the last of the dishes. James had been gone for over 20 years now, but his absence still shaped our family in ways both seen and unseen. Had I been compensating all these years, trying to give Brandon everything because he'd lost his father? Had my guilt and grief blinded me to the damage my enabling was causing? "You're thinking about James," Helen observed, always perceptive where my late husband was concerned. "Wondering what he would make of all this," I admitted. "He'd be proud of you," she said simply, "for finally setting boundaries." The next day, Brandon called to thank me for dinner. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly, "about what you said regarding education funds for the kids. Yes, I'd like to set those up myself. Not with your money, but with what we save each month. It won't grow as quickly, but it would mean more. I think that's a wonderful idea, I told him, heart swelling with pride. And Mom, I've been helping Emma and Tyler start their own savings accounts too, teaching them about money in ways I wish I'd learned earlier. After we hung up, I sat in my garden, reflecting on the journey of the past few months. The painful confrontation over the couch had been a catalyst for change that rippled through all our lives. My back still occasionally twinged when rain was coming, a physical reminder of those uncomfortable nights. But the discomfort had been worth it for the growth it precipitated. That weekend, I visited Brandon and Jade's new townhouse for the first time. It was dramatically smaller than their previous home, with a tiny yard and shared walls. But it was clean, well-maintained, and most importantly, within their actual means. Grand tour takes about 30 seconds, Brandon joked as he showed me around. The children seemed unfazed by the downsizing, happily showing me their shared bedroom with the promised bunk beds. Tyler pointed out zombie-repelling measures he'd implemented for the bottom bunk, making me smile. "In this," Brandon said with evident pride as he opened the door to a small but thoughtfully furnished room, "is your space when you visit." The guest room contained a comfortable bed, a reading lamp positioned perfectly beside it, and framed photos of family moments on the walls. On the nightstand sat a small stack of mystery novels, my favorite genre, and a carafe of water. "The bathroom's just across the hall," Jade added, a hint of her old defensiveness creeping in. "It's not fancy, but it's clean." "It's perfect," I assured them both, meaning it. That night, as I settled into the comfortable bed, I marveled at how different this felt from the lumpy couch experience. It wasn't about the physical comfort, though that was certainly welcome. It was about the intention behind it, the recognition of my worth and needs. Brandon knocked softly on the door as I was reading. "Everything okay in here?" he asked. "Enough pillows, room temperature good." "Everything's lovely," I assured him. He lingered in the doorway, seeming to want to say more. "What is it?" I prompted gently. "I just wanted to thank you," he said, voice low to avoid waking the children. "Not just for forcing us to face reality with the money situation, but for believing I could do better, as a son, as a father." "I've always believed in you, Brandon," I told him. "Even when I was enabling you." "Maybe especially then." He nodded, understanding the complexity in that statement. "Good night, Mom, sleep well." As he closed the door, I thought about the journey we'd taken since that fateful weekend on the couch. The couch that broke more than just my back, it broke patterns that had trapped us all for years. I slept deeply that night, more at peace than I had been in years, knowing that sometimes the most valuable gifts we can give our children aren't financial support, but the confidence to stand on their own. 3 months later, I hosted a family dinner at my home, the first since our confrontation. Brandon and Jade had downsized to a modest townhouse near the children's school, and my grandchildren seemed no worse for the change. The tension arrived with dessert when Jade muttered something about all the family drama over a couch. The table fell silent. My sister Helen looked down at her plate. Brandon set his fork down deliberately. "It wasn't about the couch, Jade," he said firmly. "It was about respect. About recognizing what my mother deserves after everything she's done for us." "I just think," Jade began. "No," Brandon interrupted. "Mom was right to cut us off. We needed the wake-up call." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table to me. Inside was my most recent support check uncashed. "We won't be needing this anymore," he announced. "The new budget is working. We're making it on our own." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw glimpses of the responsible, compassionate man I'd always hoped he would become. My sister Helen pulled me aside as she was leaving. "I have to admit, I thought you were making a mistake," she confessed. "Cutting him off seemed so harsh." "It was," I acknowledged. "But sometimes harshness is necessary for growth." "Well, whatever you did worked." I haven't seen Brandon this grounded since before his father died. I considered her words as I washed dishes later that evening. James had been gone for over 20 years now, but his absence still shaped our family in ways both seen and unseen. Had I been compensating all these years, trying to give Brandon everything because he'd lost his father? Had my guilt blinded me to the damage my enabling was causing? In the following weeks, Brandon continued to surprise me. He called one evening, excitement evident in his voice. "Mom, remember how you suggested putting that last support check into education funds for the kids?" "Yes," I replied, drying my hands on a dish towel. "I've decided to set those up myself," he explained. "Not with your money, but with what we save each month. It won't grow as quickly, but it would mean more." "I think that's a wonderful idea," I told him, heart swelling with pride. "And I've been helping Emma and Tyler start their own savings accounts too, teaching them about money in ways I wish I'd learned earlier." 6 months after the couch incident, I visited their new home for the weekend. A proper guest room awaited me with a comfortable bed and thoughtful touches, a reading lamp, my favorite tea, even framed photos of James and me from happier days. Brandon greeted me with a warm hug. "Welcome to our humble abode," he said, without a trace of bitterness about their downsized circumstances. The townhouse was modest but welcoming. Emma and Tyler shared a bedroom with bunk beds, something they'd initially protested but now seemed to enjoy. "Grandma, come see my savings chart," Tyler called, pulling me toward a colorful poster on the refrigerator. It showed his progress toward buying a new bicycle, with each deposit carefully recorded. "He's been doing extra chores," Brandon explained, learning that work and rewards are connected. That evening, I watched Brandon teaching Emma and Tyler about saving money, explaining why they were putting off buying a new gaming system until they'd saved half the cost themselves. "But Olivia's parents just bought her one," Emma protested. "We're not Olivia's family," Brandon replied patiently. "We make our own choices based on our priorities, not what others have." It was such a stark contrast to the attitude he and Jade had modeled just months earlier, the desperate need to keep up appearances regardless of financial reality. Later, after the children were in bed, Brandon joined me on their small patio. The night was cool, stars bright above us. "You know what's strange?" he said, gazing upward. "I thought I'd hate living with less, that I'd feel like a failure. But there's something freeing about it, about knowing exactly where we stand financially." "Your father would say the same thing," I replied. "He always believed in living within our means even when it wasn't easy." Brandon nodded, absorbing this connection to the father he'd lost too young. "I wish he could see the kids," he said softly. "See the man I'm trying to become. He'd be proud of you," I assured him. "Not for the job or the house or any material thing, but for taking responsibility, for putting your family's true needs first." "I learned that from you, Mom," he said, squeezing my hand. Even if it took a lumpy couch to make the lessons stick. We laughed together, the shared joke healing the last remnants of hurt between us. "Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money," Brandon said thoughtfully. "It's knowing how to live without needing it from someone else." I reached for his hand, remembering the lumpy couch that had started our painful journey toward healing. "The best things in life are free," I agreed, quoting something James used to say. "But not the second best things," Brandon finished the familiar phrase, squeezing my hand. The next morning, I awoke to the sounds of family life, children arguing over bathroom time, Jade's gentle mediating, Brandon's deep laugh as he prepared breakfast. Such ordinary moments, yet they filled me with extraordinary gratitude. Over breakfast, Jade surprised me by asking for advice about their family budget. "We're trying to plan a modest vacation for next summer," she explained, showing me their savings plan. "Nothing extravagant, just camping at the lake, but I want to make sure we're allocating sensibly." The request felt significant, a tacit acknowledgement that I had wisdom worth sharing, not just money. We spent an hour reviewing their finances, and I was impressed by how disciplined they'd become. "You should be proud," I told them both. "Many people never learn these lessons, no matter their age." "We had a good teacher," Brandon replied, glancing meaningfully at me. That afternoon, we took the children to the park. As Brandon pushed Tyler on the swing, Jade sat beside me on a bench. "I owe you an apology," she said abruptly. "A real one, not the half-hearted one I gave before." I turned to her, surprised by the initiative. "I resented you for years," she continued, "for having such influence over Brandon, for the money we relied on. When you cut us off, I blamed you entirely. And now?" I asked gently. Now I see it was the best thing that could have happened to us, to our marriage. She twisted her wedding ring, a simple band that had replaced the ostentatious diamond she'd once worn. We were drowning in appearances, in things that didn't matter. It takes courage to change, I acknowledged. It takes courage to force change, she corrected. What you did wasn't easy, I understand that now. As we headed back to their home, I noticed how Brandon walked differently, shoulders straighter, steps more purposeful. The burden of pretense had been lifted. After dinner, as I helped Emma with her reading homework, she looked up at me suddenly. "Daddy says you helped us by not giving us money anymore," she said, her young face serious. "That doesn't make sense." I considered how to explain complex adult concepts to an 8-year-old. "Sometimes helping isn't giving people what they ask for," I said carefully. "Sometimes it's helping them discover they're stronger than they thought." She nodded slowly. "Like when you make me try math problems myself instead of telling me the answers." "Exactly like that," I smiled, impressed by her insight. Before bed, Brandon showed me a spreadsheet on his laptop, not their budget this time, but a tracking document for his job applications and networking efforts. "I'm still looking for something with better growth potential," he explained. "But I'm approaching it differently now, building genuine relationships, focusing on where I can add value rather than just chasing titles or salaries." "That's a wise approach," I told him. "I learned it from watching you," he replied. "All those years you worked at the insurance office, you never complained about your position. You found meaning in doing your job well, in helping people." I was touched that he'd noticed, that those quiet lessons had registered beneath the more obvious ones about financial security. As I prepared for bed in my comfortable guest room, I reflected on our journey. The couch incident had been painful, physically and emotionally, but it had cracked open something that needed healing. Like setting a broken bone so it could mend properly, the temporary pain had been necessary for long-term health. Brandon knocked softly, bringing me an extra blanket though the room was plenty warm. "Just wanted to say good night," he said, lingering in the doorway. "And thank you, not just for this weekend, but for everything. For being the parent I needed, not just the one I wanted." "That's the job description," I replied, smiling. "Even when it's hard." "Especially then," he agreed. "I'm trying to remember that with Emma and Tyler." Sometimes the hardest form of love is the one that lets people face consequences. It had taken me 72 years to learn that lesson, but watching my son now, I knew it had been worth the wait.